Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to Daraja Press Podcast. This is Firoz Manji. On this episode, the poetry of Yahia Lababidi.
Hope. Hope's not quite as it seems. It's slimmer than you'd think and less steady on its feet. Sometimes it's out of breath, can hardly see ahead, and cries itself to sleep. It may not tell you all this, or the times it cheated death, but if you knew it, you'd know how hope can keep a secret.
I speak with Yahia Lababidi, author of Palestine Wail, which we published a short while ago. Welcome to Daraja Press. This is Firoz Manji, introducing you today to one of my favorite books. In fact, I am so proud to have this book, Palestine Wail by Yahia Lababidi. Thank you for joining us, Yahia. It's a real pleasure at last to meet, as it were, even if virtually.
It virtually counts. I mean, we live virtually now, so this is a good home that my book has found, and I'm very grateful to be having this conversation.
Yahia, Palestine is very personal for you, and your Palestinian grandmother, Rabiha Dajani. Tell us something about her and the story of how you came from her and your journey to where you are now.
So my paternal grandmother means a great deal to me. We were friends growing up. She was a mischievous, lively, larger than life personality who lived to 100 years. So she's sort of history on legs that way. She is my connection, my direct connection to Palestine. And she kept Palestine alive for us in the sense, whether it was dress or food or customs. But I never heard her complain or be bitter or sort of small. She embodied it the way she lived, sort of with this great life force of not being defeated and starting her life over. I don't know how many homes in how many countries. She would leave and start again. And after, for example, she had a home in Kuwait, she had a home in Germany, in the States for a while, and she would just continually reinvent herself and rise from the ashes. And that's somehow how I've come to view Palestine. This kind of sumud or defiant, even, I don't know if optimism is even permissible at this stage, but just going onness. And she was someone who was at gunpoint forced to leave her ancestral home. It's such an interesting story. I was doing a podcast for, I can't remember the context now. I think it was maybe a Ramadan thing or something or other. And Palestine Wail was just a germ of an idea. You weren't in the picture yet. And I was still with the previous publisher who initially was interested and then dropped the book because they feared, scandal and their authors walking out and all kinds of nonsense. But the book was a germ of an idea. And as part of preparation for this show that I was doing, I looked up my grandmother's family, the Dajani family, and they had the key to the city because the Christians and the Jews at the time couldn't be entrusted with the keys because they would fight all the time. So they'd given it to this Muslim family, which is so wonderful. And there was 500 years or more, a distant relative of mine, had a vision. He was a Sufi master, and he has this vision that he is meant to protect the tomb of David. And he shows up, at great personal risk and presents this improbable story, and in fact ends up with the key. And so we have this intersection in my paternal family with the history that goes back, but also Jewish, Muslim, Christian. It was not the issue it's made out to be now. And Tata Rabiha, again, to loop back to her, was someone who, when I introduced my wife to her last time we were there, she was living in Jordan, expected my grandmother to be asleep. She's, close to 100, and it was late at night. And there she was sitting, decked out like a Christmas tree next to the Christmas tree and ready to go out Christmas caroling because she knew my wife, is Christian and would appreciate that kind of thing. So I associate her with this twinkle in the eye, which, honest to goodness, one of the reasons I felt close to you initially was the twinkle in your eye. Despite whatever hard work of activism needs to be done, it's not done with a sour, long face. There's this kind of indomitable spirit of, let's get on with this, and who knows what lies around the bend if they hear this word or this book, who knows? And so there's Tata in a nutshell. I know her personally as a very playful spirit, but I also know how tough she was. And she is, for me, my entry into Palestine. I grew up in Egypt. My dad is Lebanese. Of course, what's happening in Lebanon is also very dear to my heart, no less because it was our intention really this month or last month to have a family reunion in Beirut. And at some point, my dad writes to me, he says, I don't think it's a good idea. This is before it was written, in large letters on the wall. But it's shocking, and it's yes, it's very close to home.
I've been struck by your ability to offer love in place of hate. What is happening is so outrageous. Anyone with half a humanity would feel anger and outrage at what is happening. But there's a sensitivity in the way you write that places love there, places the possibility or perhaps the impossibility of healing, and yet with hope against despair. How do you cope with that, given your intimate relationship with Palestine?
Well, many things come to mind, and let me take a sideways stab at that. I think by association of the Egyptian Revolution, which I didn't attend. I was actually in the US at the time following it from a hotel room with tears streaming down my face because I never imagined that it would happen, and yet, of course, it was inevitable. And I remember one of the slogans of that revolution was, this is a shoddy translation from the Arabic, but basically, we are entrusted with hope, and despair is a betrayal, in the sense that despair was not really an option. And I think when you've sort of been through hell or truly suffered, you realize that it's almost a luxury to give up. Because, also poetry, the role of poetry, as I understand it, is a kind of spiritual journalism. You're always reminding yourself first, because one is susceptible as a sensitive human being to moments of doubt and something akin to despair, we'll call it, short-lived perhaps. But you're always reminding yourself of your higher allegiances to one another and what is indestructible, both in us and in our world. And it becomes harder and harder to see and hear that amid, the din of hatred and this sort of very reactionary violence. It's very easy to get angry. It's very easy to give up, but then you realize you're trafficking in the same type of violence that your so-called enemy, I already the term enemy is one that I'm uncomfortable with. You're trafficking in this very volatile, toxic way of being that in the end circles right back and makes it even harder and worse for you. So as much as possible, one is always trying to remember that what we're looking at now is this is very difficult to say at this moment, because this is a moment where I have to say, post-election, with Trump added to the mix, I took a moment where I was destabilized and I didn't know. I thought, where do we go from here? What does it matter? What do words or poetry matter? And then, the next day or two, one remembers it's not the words, it's that possibility, the better angels of our nature that you need to remind people of, because that's what will get us out, not the small-minded, narrow-hearted way of being which got us in this mess in the first place.
I'm reminded of Audre Lorde saying that it's the hatred which lurks in those streets, the urge to destroy us,
Yeah.
all if we truly work for change.
Yeah.
This hatred and our anger are very different. And I think that's a really important issue, that it is that anger can be a source of power if it is not confused with hatred,
True.
which is the fury of those who don't share our goals. Yes.
Right. Like a righteous, principled anger. So, I mean, I think for me, the test is, does it build up or does it tear down and destroy? If it does build up, if it wakes people up and stirs them and softens their heart or opens their eyes, then it is a pure white flame, a righteous anger. But if it's something that clouds their vision and their hearts and just has them, baying for blood, then it's of no good. I mean, I think of an aphorism. Forgive me for quoting myself, but I don't really think of the aphorisms as mine. And this was written well before the latest chapter in Palestine, post October 7th. But the aphorism says something like this: if our hearts should harden and turn to ice, we must be careful at least not to blame the weather. And I remember writing this, and I try to revisit this now to remind myself that we are responsible for our hearts. The weather could be atrocious. It could be, hail, fire, hell. It could be hell. It looks and feels like hell. But we are still responsible for our hearts and our response. And there is this notion, and I think this is the spiritual realm again, without making it too narrow so that it can have a broader resonance, that this too is a form of illusion. This too is a persistent test, or a very serious illusion, or prova, or the run through before the play. It counts. I mean, it counts. Life or death counts. But there's still that detachment, in the sense that what we do matters elsewhere too. So there is this notion of we must guard our moral, spiritual selves from corruption and depravity, because this shall pass, and perhaps in a higher court we will be held accountable for our behavior.
Yeah, it reminds me, I recently was reminded of a quote from Toni Morrison, that this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That Beautiful. Is how civilizations heal.
Beautiful. And one needs this reminder. I need this reminder. When you say it, it activates something in me, and I'm reminded anew to just, dust myself off and get on with it. Because, just last night, I'm reading about this gruesome, these cabinet picks, Trump's cabinet picks, and when it's so hard not to get caught up in this, but I realize that this is at least the immediate world that we're dealing with, and these are the power players that one has to contend with. Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who has gone on record, saying that Palestinians don't exist and Palestine is a mythical land, and the settlements, he's thinking about holiday homes, and it's so provocative on so many levels. And one sees how this is yet another carte blanche for Israel, or to go ahead and do as they please, and yet there's also the people. There's also, this is something I was very aware of growing up in Egypt, that people and government are two separate things. Yes, there are people who are deceived or even ill-informed and fired up for the wrong reactionary reasons, but there's a sizable number of the population, and there's the great young, the protesters, the college campus kids, and activists and poets and just good people all around who are waking up to this and saying, wait a minute, what sort of victimhood is this? That responds in this manner. There's an Australian aphorist and poet, George Murray. I don't know if I have the aphorism exactly right, but this marked me years ago, and in a very personal context, but I see how this can apply to nation states as well, where he talks about, is someone still a martyr if everyone around them is suffering? I mean, at what point is a victim no longer a victim when they've exacted a revenge that is well beyond their personal pain? You know, this is something I also studied. I covered cult leaders, or at least one, for an HBO documentary called The Vow, about this group called Nexium. I went to New York. The cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom, so I was sort of trying to paint pictures with words there for the season 2 at least. And studying these cult leaders, you notice how at some point the victims that are brought in, you know, and they're brainwashed, of course, and they have collateral, they have stuff that's held against them, so they can't speak. But then at some point, these are, you know, grown-ups, and they inflict the kind of damage on people, and you think, wait a minute, are they still a victim now, or have they crossed the line? Because now they're in a position of power where they are repeating a vicious cycle. And one understands fear, and one understands, you know, pain and suffering, and one would never diminish the loss of one life. But when you respond in a certain way, then you lose sympathy and the right to call yourself a victim. This is just only fair. I don't think that's radical to say so.
You know, drawing on your introduction, I love the quote from the Sufi mystic Rumi: "The wound is the place where the light enters you."
Yeah, that's tremendous. I actually have, I'm not wearing it now, but when I go out, especially if I'm in a setting where I feel there might be any hostility, I'll wear a bracelet, like a protective shield, and it has that Rumi quote on it. And I just think it's so beautiful. Of course, there's the famous echo from Leonard Cohen, where he says there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
That's right. Yeah. Oh God. Yes.
And it's a beautiful song. Sing whatever remains to be sung.
Ring the bells that Phil can ring. Yeah.
Forget your perfect offering.
Offerings. Yes.
There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about the cover. This was something that you asked that we have this as your cover for this book.
The cover, yeah. First of all, I'm happy you approved it, because it really means a great deal to me. If you could judge a book by its cover, I would be so lucky to be judged by this cover. It's a painting by Palestinian painter and really national treasure Slimane Mansour. I grew up with my grandmother and my aunts. I would see his paintings in our homes. Just wherever we go, you visit a friend, you certainly in galleries, etc. And I assumed that he was long gone, which is, you know, when you're young, you don't know, you don't have any sense of age. And then at some point, you know, especially after October 7th, I began to see his work circulating, and I began to seek his work, not just to see it, but to seek it because of its terrible poetry. And he's someone who's, you know, really, he's an artist of the Intifada. He's been in and out of jail. He means a great deal. He's someone who's dared to speak up, but he's also dared to hope. And the title of this painting is Symbol of Hope. And I didn't know this at the time, but I really, whenever I was losing hope, I would somehow return to this painting again and again, also because of the proportions of it. The moon, which looks like a sun, and the dove, the scale of them, I mean, they occupy a good half of the painting, and they're certainly larger than the people in the village who are, you know, looking up to them with longing and pining and trust, and these kids who are chasing a star on the rooftops, and the mother who's, you know, cradling her children or her family. And it's a reminder that hope, again, or the symbol of hope, the act of looking up and trusting, even in the midst of moments when it seems inconceivable, when it seems darkest and most hopeless, is somehow larger than us, is something that certainly sustains us, but is so beyond is so beyond extinguishing by, the mere politics or violence or politicians or this current moment. Because if one were to have a God's eye view, if one were to imagine history as an afternoon, there's no anticipating the outcome. There's no anticipating the outcome. And I think again of this beautiful line, which Martin Luther King approximated to his needs. It's Theodore Parker, who was a minister, who initially said it. But it's this idea of the moral arc of the universe being long, and he can't see the end of it, but it bends towards justice. That's
long arc of history, yes.
Yeah, outrageously hopeful thing to say in the midst of moments such as ours, because all you see is the injustice. All you see is the immorality and the depravity that's being, rewarded and amplified. And yet, this isn't the full picture. This isn't the full picture. It hasn't ended yet. It's not the first or the last time that we've sort of lost the plot or steered off the main path. And how it will end, who's to say? But in the meantime, despair is betrayal, and we're required to as much as possible look up and remain hopeful. So this is why I find it tremendously powerful, and everything about it, even everything, the color scheme, what you've done, also the way you've honored. It almost looks like it's hammered in part of the night. There's something about it that's, like I said, if this book were to be judged by its cover, I should be so lucky.
I think Kate McDonald, who is our designer, would be very pleased to hear that. There you are in Florida at the time when the elections have taken place. And there we have Trump and his gundas rising to power.
Yeah.
Stranger in a strange land.
Oh, I marked that one. I didn't know if it was too violent, but since you mentioned it, if you'd like me to read it, I'll read it.
Please.
It's not easy, and I don't believe in a kind of facile optimism either, because I think that's a kind of betrayal of intelligence and the work that needs to be done. So one is not just saying, shut your eyes and just, clap foolishly for whatever's happening. What is happening needs to be addressed and looked in the eye. And there are moments when one feels very estranged from the current scene. And I've been in the States now for 18 years, give or take. And from the beginning, people would ask me, what's it like as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a this, as a that? And I said, it's like being anyone else. I don't believe that I've met with discrimination. Personally, I've met with this ambiguous, nameless thing, but I believe that once you talk to someone and meet them and connect as a human being, then you realize that what they had was not an idea of you, but something that they've trotted, they've picked up from the news or their own unexamined views. So this is called Stranger in a Strange Land. America is a psychopath, a gaslighting, abusive partner that insists on being loved. No, worshipped as saint and savior. Never mind your murdered family lying at your feet and bloody knife still clutched in their twitching hands. It wasn't always this way. Look what you made me do. Don't make me do it again. Smile and try to be grateful. Yeah, this was with the elections. Obviously, Trump was unspeakable. Even the fact that he is in the running again says a great deal that I'd rather not contemplate too deeply about the dark, foul mood America is in. I realize this is driven by desperation and economic deprivation and fear, always fear. But the fact that he's in the running is already horrendous and monstrous. And imagining the sort of revenge that a creature like him would exact if granted another chance, which, as it turns out, he has been granted. But then the option was nothing to get excited about either. Biden was not a consideration for me, considering his position on Israel and Palestine. and I didn't understand with Kamala Harris what meaningful shift there would be in policy. And so it was really very painful, and it was at a time when my wife and I are more interested in Jill Stein, but we know she doesn't stand a chance in green hell to be elected. But still, it's a kind of registering a protest that maybe this whole two-party system is broke, and we need to have it looked at. I mean, America, young America, with all of its new ideas, that's the best you can offer us, Trump and Biden? It just doesn't make any sense. And, then there's also this idea of race being an issue, working against Kamala Harris, gender being an issue. Is America ready for a female president, irrespective of her politics? So the whole thing was very disheartening. Personally, I would have loved to see Bernie Sanders, even for a term, even for a semester, for whatever, just to get in the mix and shake it up a little. Or a Dr. Cornel West. That's someone that I really could get behind and get excited about. But those aren't the options. And increasingly, you look at these cabinet picks, Trump's cabinet picks, and they are outdoing one another for who is more, rabidly Zionist, who is more pro-Israel, in a sense that even Israelis of conscience are saying this is too far.
Yeah, the fact that we were fortunate that your book got rejected by your usual publishers, but we are in a period where the language itself, there are words which are not allowed. And your poem during the genocide, I don't know if you'd like to read that.
The ones that somehow seem to have found connection with people. So I've had, fortunately, poem read in the Edinburgh Festival or other festivals in the UK, or I mentioned Canada earlier, or just shared online. And this is one of the ones that seems to have something of a life online. And I see it on Instagram or wherever else people share these things. And yeah, there's things you can't even say. And so during a genocide, you will find that during a genocide, most words lose their meaning. Some sound empty and others strange. Apart from unceasing prayer, eloquence takes the form of tears or kindness and solidarity. Even a quiet moan or sighing is preferable to false words, or worse, a loud and wounding silence. Since we mentioned this publisher, the previous publisher, who, they're not certainly the worst people in the world. On the contrary, that my poetry editor was someone I held in very high regard and still do. Eckhart scholar, Rilke scholar, poet in their own right, someone who helped me shape the book, even in the sense of honoring the cover and peace and the rest of it. But the publisher, in this, long meetings, 2-hour Zoom meeting we had towards the end, after sort of initially saying how much he cared for the book, et cetera, let it be known in no uncertain terms that there were words like genocide that he was not comfortable using, even though these were words that were being contested by genocide historians, by the UN, that all was one thing. And on the other side of the balance was a few Jewish friends of his that had read it and felt targeted. And his fear, unfounded as far as I'm concerned, that his authors would leave the publishing house if this book was published, and that the term genocide was, to quote him, prejudging a legal term. And it just seemed to me like, if I didn't have that basic backing from my publisher, because the idea wasn't a hard no at the time, it was maybe I would rewrite things, maybe we would consider, maybe it was best that I go somewhere else. At some point I thought it doesn't make sense to remain in a situation where someone is so afraid of speaking. And this is not at the first month or two. This is after it had unfolded. And I thought it doesn't seem right. When I want a baseline of courage. And really that's what it comes down to, courage. Because courage can also condemn all acts of violence. Courage can understand where things come from, but it can also understand that violence begets violence, hate begets violence, etc.
If you're uncomfortable saying genocide, then say mass murder, say boneyard, say unmarked graves, say humanity under the rubble, say at the very least, not in my name, but please say something.
You're listening to the Daraja Press podcast. Daraja is the Kiswahili word for bridge. As its name suggests, Daraja Press seeks to build bridges, especially bridges of solidarity between and amongst movements, intellectuals, and those engaged in struggles for a just world. Check out our other episodes, books, and more at darajapress.com. So now let's get back to the show. I love the way you connect Gaza and goals. Would you like to read that and perhaps explain this more?
Gaza, capital of hurt. Fitting that the word gauze should have ties to Gaza, a center of weaving since the 13th century. It's our turn, after hundreds of years, to dress Gazan wounds and wipe their tears. And it's this idea of history and our higher allegiances to one another, where we take turns being history's scapegoat, where we take turns making one another suffer, where we take turns healing or trying to. And I'm a pacifist. I really am. It's puzzling to people, certainly people from where I come from, who are like, no, this is not permitted. This is self-defense. I understand, but self-defense, what is the outcome? What is the outcome? How are our best interests represented? How has October 7th, for example, put Palestinians in a better situation? I mean, when we negotiate for hostage release, after some 45,000 Palestinians have died, what does it mean to have 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 or 200 Palestinians return after, such great losses? What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. So yes, I understand self-defense, I understand indignation, but I also understand that this sort of viciousness only begets more viciousness. There's a poem I would like to read.
It's your turn, please.
I didn't know, honest to goodness, feels I don't want to say the word depressed because it's a clinical term, and again, I don't think it's correct to use these words, but I've been feeling defeated lately. And I was just watching this podcast or one of these Mehdi Hassan and Bassem Youssef, and I love the both of them for different reasons. And I was looking at Bassem Youssef and I thought, good God, what's happened to him? He's defeated. He needs to just check out, stop talking for a while until he finds whatever it is, because he's a comedian, but he's not just a lightweight comedian. He's become a spokesperson now. He's very knowledgeable. And he has this platform, and yet he left Mehdi Hassan completely depressed. And he said, you began by telling me that I'm the depressive one, and now I feel depressed having spoken to you. He was burnt out. He was totally burnt out just by entertaining, championing, considering, and he couldn't see a way out. And sometimes that is the case. And so there was a poem I wanted to read, which is actually, I think, the first poem after Hope, but I didn't know if I had the nerve to read it, just because it was maybe too ridiculously hopeful, and trying to imagine an alternative scenario. The name of the poem is Alternative Scenario. And just to also imagine, the same way I say we are responsible for our hearts, if we had behaved differently, maybe we might have elicited a different type of response, maybe have elicited a different type of sympathy, maybe deprived Israeli propaganda of certain talking points and casting us, as barbarians, bloodthirsty barbarians. Alternative scenario. After the horrors of October 7, the good people of Palestine rushed to the side of stricken Israelis, tending to the wounded, mourning the dead, comforting survivors. They kept vigil, praying and weeping, delivering truckloads of flowers, serving trays by day of warm meals and sweets. Palestinian families flooded the streets, en masse, protesting, not in our names, demanding the return of the hostages. Recognizing the great need, they gifted what they too longed for: mercy, solace, solidarity, and the world witnessing never forgot. Helpless, Hamas eventually surrendered. The Israeli government in turn relented, and walls in hearts crumbled, then tumbled. There seems to be a companion poem, if I can read it back to back, because in my mind they're connected, and they've both sort of been published around the same time by spiritual journals that are very much attuned to social activism, that have not separated the realm of the spirit from the bloody mess of the world and the work that needs to be done here. And these two sort of, in my mind, are companion pieces, because I do admire the protests beyond words, and I have such high respect for these young people who are really showing us the way. But I'm also very wary of, and this applies to protests where I come from, and how they, in Egypt, how they're sabotaged by government goons in order to provoke the peaceful protesters and then brand them, as violent, vicious mob that needs to be dealt with. So this is called What to Bring to a Protest. Bring a candle burning in your eyes to lead the way. Bring a bird nestled in your heart to set others free. Bring a shroud large enough to bury the dead past. Bring a flag spotless and white to surrender pain. And I know it's hard, nearly impossible, but the other way is a dead end and perpetuates this myth that Israel must protect itself. The other side, have no mercy and want our extermination, and we must continue, the work. What is the work? The work of ethnic cleansing, the work of genocide. If we are to truly examine our souls and purify our hearts as much as possible, then we rob them of this vicious propaganda to exterminate us.
And that ties then to also your other poem. I could get you to read all of them. Who is innocent?
Okay, who is innocent? Yeah. Oh, good God, who is innocent? If one were heart of heart, they might ask, is any Israeli innocent? In a state where military is compulsory for all, are there any citizens? Is Israel really a democracy, or just another theocracy, blinded by a too literal faith? How can any freedom be built upon another's captivity? The jailer is never free. But by the same harsh logic, one must condemn every Palestinian for the stone in their hand or in their heart. Who is innocent since Cain took his brother Abel's life? Whoever is able can live better. In Hebrew, Cain means possessor, while Abel means empty. What does that mean today? If we have no peace, Mother Teresa reminds us, it's because we've forgotten. We belong to each other.
Thank you.
No, I mean, this is it. This idea that we belong to each other and we don't need to take sides, because there are no sides. There really are no sides. This notion that what's happening over there is not connected to me. it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of time, but it's one body. One doesn't need to be a great philosopher or mystic to understand that it's one body. And when we are suffering somewhere, the entire equilibrium is upset. And what we do to another somehow or other returns to us in some form or other. And this idea of, is Israel safer? I mean, let's ask on a very simple level. Is Israel safer? Absolutely not. Are the Palestinians now more likely to think well of and be more peaceful towards Israelis? How can you expect that when you've wiped out their families, when children have lost their schools, their hospitals, their places of worship, their homes, when they must leave and they know they can't return? How do you expect goodwill? You can't pound that into people. And it's just human nature. And what applies to an Israeli child or a family applies to a Palestinian, to an American, to a Ukrainian, to a Russian. It's the same. It's the same thing. So until we kind of can turn the volume down and dial down this emotional heat, we're still stuck in this vicious cycle. I'm trying to think what poem would belong to this particular moment. I have family, that's close enough, and I have close friends who politically we don't see eye to eye, and I'm not the only person. This was the case in Egypt. This was the case when Trump last ascended to the throne. This time it's the recrimination, the betrayal is greater, but still these are people, like I said, close friends and family, shockingly so. And this poem is another one that has done the rounds. I was actually very touched to see this one. It was published in not Tikkun, now Tiferet, journal, which is sort of healing art, how art can heal. There's sort of a Jewish emphasis, and it was wonderful to see it. I don't know, shared how many thousands of times online, and I thought people are responding to this because it resonates with their reality too, their family, their friends. It's called What Tragedy Teaches Us. Our friends fall into different camps. Those who feel our pain as their own, without hesitation or calculation, will rush to our side, casting their lot with ours, seeking to heal. Others, tested by fire or tempted by the world, we must try to forgive, whose tongues are tied or hands are bound by an unspeakable doubt or allegiance to another pain. At least they wish us no harm, and if they do not know us or themselves well enough. Forgiveness only matters, Derrida argued, if we forgive the unforgivable. If you and I cannot remain friends because we do not see eye to eye, how can we call for peace in our world? And again, this poem is testing me on a daily basis because one is susceptible to the provocations that unfold day to day, whether it's in politics or friends whom you expect to know better or otherwise, let's say. So this is a daily challenge. It's not something that is resolved. It's a continual process. So this is the last of the ones that I sort of, at this moment, I'm carrying with me. And this is, the book is shaped in such a way that it's, I am not, this is going to sound a little funny perhaps, but I don't identify as a strictly political person. In fact, I would prefer not to talk about politics because I find politics a smaller realm, a narrower prism. I think we're larger than our politics. In fact, I was delighted to be reading a book of interviews with Mahmoud Darwish, and over again, he was almost reproaching the moment, the historical moment, but also his critics, his readers, for always demanding of him the political poem and reading his love poems as political. It's terrific when it can free them up or give them light or hope to carry on, but it is also reductive because we are more than just politics, and we are more than our reaction to the political moment and the agitation of the politicians, etc. And so the way this book is structured sort of moves away from, because it's written during a very political moment where the politics is unmissable. One would have to be dead or hard of heart not to acknowledge the politics in some shape or form. But then it moves sort of from one section, I believe is called Overwhelming Emotions, to sort of beyond that to Unbearable Casualties. It used to be called Overwhelming Emotion. Lingering at a Threshold is the second part, and then On a Far Shore. The far shore, as I understand it, is where one is unassailable, where one is truly beyond reach of being dragged down into this mud or hell, and even when confronted with it, responds from a place that is purer and beyond that moment. And that's the place that I believe can get us out of it, not being up against the screen, so to speak, where we can't see beyond it. So this is a poem called Summary, and it's sort of, at least from a spiritual point of view, how I see things sometimes when I don't know what else to say. The hands were made to clasp, the knees designed to bend, the body created to pray. What else is there to say? The mouth was shaped to gasp, the eyes drawn to attend, the soul commanded to obey. What else is there to say? The memory was wired to lapse, the heart fashioned to rend, the will inclined to betray. What else is there to say? So that's, for the moment, what I have.
And that is one of many that I have read out at our Friday night vigils in Wakefield.
That's very meaningful. It's so funny. Even at this age, I'm 51, whatever that means. I'm not 19 or 18 whenever I started writing, and was sort of bewildered and overwhelmed by the entire writing project of just this notion, I'm going to expose my innermost thoughts to strangers. And so poems like this one seem so pathetically intimate that I wouldn't imagine that they would matter or warrant being shared with anyone, because it's one's way of talking to themselves, really, or comforting themselves or reminding themselves. And yet, marvel of marvels, as one progresses down the line of life and literature, you realize that it is the most personal that stands a chance to resonate on some sort of universal level, because we are essentially the same, because we are all bewildered and susceptible and sensitive and longing for a better world. I don't think anyone, even the gleeful arsonists of the moment who are calling to let it all burn, I don't think that truly, if it burned, they would be satisfied, because they too have people and lives that they would like to see flourish. So here we find ourselves.
Indeed. And it is that intimacy, it is that kindness and love that comes across in your poems. And I think that they mean a great deal. And I think you should be not ashamed of the influence that your poetry is having. And so I want to thank you for honoring us with publishing your book.
honest to goodness, it feels like home. Being with you, the first time I saw you, first of all, your work speaks for itself. It is not, as I understand it, angry activism that wants to bring the world down. It is righteously indignant. It's bridge building, literally bridge building. This is for me the grandest image of the bridge. And when I saw you, when we had I believe our only Zoom virtual meeting when we were first getting to meet each other over this book project, you felt familiar to me in the sense of there was that twinkle in your eye, and I thought, oh, this is where I want to be. This is where I will be heard, because I don't want it to be just. I don't want to condemn. I don't think condemning alone helps anybody, and I am obsessed with woundedness, and I think I go into this at great length in the preface of the book, but just briefly here also, I think if we are sensitive to the woundedness of others, then we don't allow ourselves certain behavior and certain hardness of heart. And I think this openness, this open-heartedness to the woundedness that we are all experiencing now really is our only way, whether it's the Rumi quote of the wound being where the light enters. Everything else is surrounded, it's by darkness and anger, but then you've got, poetry.
I think the point that you make, that Gibran makes, hate is a dead thing. Who of you would be a tomb? Yahia, I'd like to thank you for having joined us today, and I look forward to reading more of your wonderful poetry.
I'm very grateful.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
That was Yahia Lababidi, author of Palestine Wail, published by Daraja Press. You can find this book and more at darajapress.com. Produced by myself and Pierre Loisel. Thank you for listening.